Dennis and Brenda Bowman. In 1989, Dennis and Brenda Bowman, a married couple from Holland, Michigan, had 2 children. They resided at the intersection of 52nd Street and Lincoln Road. Brenda used to work at the jewelry counter at the Meyer department store, and Dennis was a wood machinist. They had 2 children, Vanessa Bowman and Aundria. On June 23, 1974, Aundria was born as Alexis Badger. Randy Badger and Kathy Turkanian are her biological parents. She was renamed and adopted by Dennis and Brenda Bowman prior to her first birthday. January 1988 marked Vanessa's birth month. Aundria became more than just her big sister after growing up as an only child. She was the chubby, red-headed baby's 3rd parent. Aundria stayed at home changing diapers and cleaning bottles, while other children her age went to Friday night football games and after-school activities. Police were contacted by Dennis Bowman on March 11, 1989. He informed them that Aundria, 14, had gone missing when he had returned home from work. Dennis reported that a $100 piece of jewelry from his drawer was stolen, along with a few of Aundria's possessions. He disclosed to the police that Aundria was a disturbed adolescent who had previously fled to a friend's home and was involved in regular arguments with her mother. The police reported Aundria as a runaway and forwarded her case to the Youth Services Bureau as they did not suspect foul play. Not many individuals acquainted with the Bowmans challenged the official story. There had been rumors circulated about the family over the years. Aundria once had a wrist wound that was bleeding when she got on the school bus in middle school. While some children rumored that Aundria tried suicide, others claimed she had slashed herself trying to re-enter her home after her parents had shut her out. Before we continue, we want to remind you that only a small percentage of people who watch our videos are actually subscribed. So if you enjoy our content, consider subscribing. It's free and you can always change your mind later. Now, let's move on with the video. Rumor had it that Brenda, a plump woman with curly bangs, and Dennis, a former Navy reservist with reddish-brown hair, a goatee, and wire-rimmed glasses, had abused Aundria. However, back then, private matters were seen as family matters. Many in Holland felt that Aundria had finally split up because she was so tired of her house. Perhaps she had searched for her biological mother. People had heard that she was pregnant or had grabbed a ride to a nearby truck stop before leaving town with an older boy. In the weeks and months after her daughter vanished, Brenda shared a number of suggestions that appeared to corroborate Aundria's escape. Most people's memory of her was created by a single photograph. When she originally disappeared, the police were given it. Aundria can be seen in it, sitting in front of a blue studio background, her green eyes directed skyward as she looks slightly off camera. Pictures of missing kids were frequently printed on milk container sides or on flyers that were posted to the top of pizza delivery boxes. Aundria's photo ended up in another place. The band Soul Asylum made their music video debut in 1993 for the song Runaway Train, which featured the names and pictures of children who went missing across the nation. Multiple versions of the video, which aired on MTV and VH1, were a big smash. Aundria's picture can be seen in the Michigan performance shortly after the 2-minute mark. Director Tony Kaye stated, looking back on the film 2 decades after it was first released, that the film was responsible for the discovery of over 24 missing children. Sadly, were discovered as a result of the video. Sadly, Aundria Bowman's case was unsuccessful since she was not one of them. When Carl Koppelman took over in 2010, Aundria's case would see its next significant development. Carl became interested in cyber sleuths after developing an interest in real crime. This is a forum where amateur sleuths and cozy detectives may interact and work together on unresolved cases. Carl poured numerous hours into searching through NAMUS, the National Database of Unexplained Dead and Missing People. The 2 primary sections of the database, the deceased and the vanished, have some overlap. Carl made an effort to compare the features of unidentified bones discovered with those of people who had vanished from sight. Carl had an idea when he saw that loved ones could have trouble identifying some of the bodies due to their age and condition. Based on post-mortem images, he began rendering Jane and John in a lifelike manner. These representations have helped answer some of the cases that we've previously discussed on this channel. Carl gave us the renderings once he was done, and occasionally the database would publish them. In order to aid fellow do-it-yourself investigators in their identification job, he also shared his work on web sleuths. Carl eventually started working with the police DNA Doe project, which uses genealogy research and genetic testing to identify human remains. Carl developed an interest in the Jane Doe case in Racine County. In 1999, she was discovered close to a Wisconsin cornfield's edge. 1999, on the edge of a cornfield in Wisconsin. She had been dead for around 12 hours, but any evidence that could have helped the investigation washed away by the rain. It seems likely that the young woman's life had been snatched and discarded elsewhere. After an autopsy, it was discovered that she had been abused and neglected for a long time and may have had cognitive disabilities. Her body displayed evidence of violence. She had a cauliflower ear and damaged bones. Her funeral was attended by about 50 members of the farming community where she was discovered. She was seen donning a Western-style shirt for guys, embroidered with red flowers and made of gray and silver. Carl entered his location, gender, age, and other general search parameters on NamUs and scrolled through the list of missing people. Generally, the response was emphatically negative. Though the location and age didn't match, Carl was given optimism by Aundria Bowman's entry. Both Aundria and the Jane Doe from Racine County had similar physical traits, and their ages coincided. When Jane Doe was killed in 1999, Aundria would have been 25 years old. The location of Aundria's disappearance, Holland, lies exactly across Lake Michigan from the Jane Doe's discovery. By automobile, the distance between the two locations is only 4 hours. Carl presented his notion to law enforcement, who were intrigued enough to look into it further. Police would have to compare DNA from the body to someone in Aundria's family in order to conclude whether or not the Jane Doe was Aundria. Because Aundria was adopted, it took some time for the authorities to find her birth mother. Kathy Turkanian is the birth mother of Aundria. At 14 years old, she fled her family in 1972. With no money, Kathy hitched a ride to Memphis, Tennessee from their home in Virginia. Randy Badger, 19, was introduced to Kathy. Kathy and Randy went to South Carolina in December 1972, where it was permissible for a juvenile to get married with parental consent. The reason Kathy's parents willingly gave it up was that they had no desire to take on any responsibility for her. When Kathy discovered she was pregnant, the couple had been married for less than a year. Kathy gave birth to a healthy daughter on June 23, 1974. Alexis was her given name. Kathy and Randy divorced when Alexis was 5 months old, and she returned to live with her parents in Virginia. Kathy came to the realization that she couldn't offer Alexis the life she desired and that her family wouldn't support her. After being placed for adoption, Dennis and Brenda Bowman quickly took custody of Alexis. Police investigating Aundria's case wrote to Kathy Turkanian's residence in April of 2010. The letter clarified that Aundria might be a Jane Doe discovered in Wisconsin and that she vanished from her adoptive parents. To be certain, the police required a sample of Kathy's DNA. Although Kathy was willing to give her DNA, she was interested in learning more about her daughter's past. There were no specifics in the letter, and Kathy was unaware that her name had been changed to Aundria Bowman. She looked up information about Michigan's missing girls on the internet. Finding one from the town of Holland whose birthday and physical attributes matched Alexis's was not difficult. Upon seeing the school photo of the girls, Kathy believed Aundria Bowman might be her daughter. She made contact with Carl Koppelman as part of her investigation to learn more about Aundria. As Kathy awaited the results of the DNA test, she also spoke with Pat O'Reilly, a retired Michigan investigator. Pat revealed to Kathy that Aundria vanished because of her adoptive father, Dennis Bowman. Let's examine Dennis and his other misdeeds in more detail. A 19-year-old lady was driven off the road by a motorcycle rider in May 1980 when she was riding her bike north of Holland, Michigan. She was instructed to get off her bike and enter the woods by the stranger. The girl remained still. With a rifle in his hand, the man shot past her and gave the order again. She remained still, though. Once more, the man shot at the dirt close to her feet. He threatened to shoot her next. The young lady seized the chance to pedal as quickly as she could as a car passed by at that very moment, turning his attention in the direction of the disturbance. She was able to wave down a person in a pickup truck who drove her home, and the man chose not to shoot or pursue her. The young lady gave the authorities a description of the offender when her parents called the police: a Caucasian man wearing a blue helmet and colored spectacles. She mentioned that his motorcycle had a blacktop case attached to the rear. The authorities had taken into custody a suspect at the end of the day. After glancing at him, the young woman realized he was the man who had attempted to harm her. It was Dennis Bowman, who was a married father at the time. Aundria was almost 6 years old at the time. Dennis received a 5 to 10-year prison sentence after being found guilty of assault with the intent to commit a crime. After he was referred for psychological counseling, a judge concluded that, given his freedom, he would probably be a threat to women. Dennis did, however, receive the minimal punishment. A state trooper in Doret, Michigan responded to an alarm at 28-year-old Vicki Vanden Brink's mobile home one day in 1998. Because of her numerous reports of break-ins, the sheriff's office established a security system. Dennis Bowman was seen leaving the site through the back door by the trooper when he arrived. Nestled between Holland and Doret, Hamilton is the place where the Bowmans had relocated. Shortly after Aundria vanished in 1989, Dennis informed the police that he was spending a brief period of time with his former colleague, Vicki Vanden Brink. Vicki, who wasn't home when the alarm went off, was contacted by officials after Dennis was released, but she said Dennis was lying. Dennis subsequently gave a different account, telling the police that he had gone inside the trailer to use the restroom. He asserted that he had visited the location at least once previously when his daughter Vanessa desired to offer Girl Scout cookies to Vicki. Doubting their suspicions, the police asked Dennis's consent to search his property: a short-barreled shotgun, a black hoodie, a mask, and a black duffel bag containing lingerie that was subsequently recognized as belonging to Vicki Vanden Brink's were discovered in the loft of an outbuilding. Based on what Detective Pat O'Reilly had informed her, Kathy Turkanian filed a Freedom of Information Act request and discovered Dennis Bowman's criminal history. Kathy was certain that Dennis Bowman killed Aundria after witnessing what he did to other women. If Kathy was correct, then Aundria wasn't the Jane Doe from Racine County. Only if Aundria had survived for 10 years after her disappearance would that theory have made sense. It was confirmed in 2013 by the eagerly awaited DNA findings. The Jane Doe and Kathy were unrelated. Carl and Kathy first had a face-to-face meeting at the Missing in Michigan conference in September of 2013. The purpose of the meeting, which was organized by the state police, was to increase awareness of cold cases and maybe produce leads. Finding Aundria Bowman was the message on the personalized shirts Kathy and Carl arrived wearing. Carl looked around the room, startled when he saw familiar faces. Kathy turned as he gave her a gentle prod. "Vanessa is that," she said. "That's Brenda, too." Brenda was able to identify Kathy because she had stated on Facebook that she thought Dennis was to blame. Brenda seems eager to share her version of events. After Aundria vanished, she maintained, she and Dennis had complied with all police requests. As evidence, she produced a binder with notes and posters about missing persons. She related stories of seeing Aundria. She was obviously still of the opinion that the adolescent had fled. When Carl mentioned Dennis's criminal history, Brenda reportedly said, "I don't forget what he did, but I do forgive him. I honor my matrimonial vows with great care." Following the meeting, Kathy engaged the services of Jeffrey Floor, a private investigator. Kathy and Carl had never seen Aundria's police file until he was able to obtain it. Strangely, the oldest records in it date back to March 1989, the month when Aundria vanished. Their previous date was 4 months ago. At that point, reports of abuse in the Bowman residence prompted police action. The report stated that local officials had concluded that the charges were false, although it did not elaborate on what exactly transpired. Carl and Kathy were certain that something had been overlooked by the police. The detective who had taken up Aundria's case, Chris Haverdink, was met by Kathy and Carl in 2017. Haverdink acknowledged Bowman's suspicions, but it was insufficient justification for an arrest. Dennis Bowman was taken into custody by the Allegan County Sheriff's Office on November 22, 2019. However, this was unrelated to Aundria. 9 years before to Aundria's disappearance, he had been arrested for a crime that was done almost 800 miles from the shores of Lake Michigan. Bowman was taken into custody due to suspicions that he killed Kathleen Doyle in 1980. Kathleen, a 25-year-old, had been beaten, stabbed, and strangled with an electrical cable after being stripped naked. After obtaining male DNA from the remains, investigators were unable to find many leads until Henry Lee Lucas was apprehended in 1983. Lucas asserted that Otis Toole, a partner, and himself were accountable. The charges were ultimately withdrawn once it was discovered that his confessions were fake. Science eventually made its way to the scene. Investigating these cold cases through genetic genealogy, which matches unknown DNA with a vast number of samples kept in databases, was quickly gaining popularity. Leading laboratory Parabon Nanolabs collaborated with Norfolk investigators to test DNA taken at Kathleen's crime scene. Genealogical research quickly provided them with a list of over 30 suspects. In 2019, it directed investigators to Dennis Bowman following additional tests and police work. In order to face trial, Bowman was extradited to Virginia. He had already admitted by then. He acknowledged coming inside Kathleen Doyle's house via the rear window. He said it was an attempted robbery and that he was intoxicated. He maintained that he didn't intend to kill Kathleen and that he wasn't prepared to discover her in the house. However, she was inside the home when he killed her. Bowman was in Norfolk at the time for his yearly 2-week stint in the Navy Reserve. He was also free on bond from prison. He was in court awaiting trial for the attempted shooting of the 19-year-old Holland woman who managed to flee on her bike. Kathy discovered that she had unintentionally contributed to the resolution of Kathleen Doyle's case. Private investigator Jeffrey Floor informed her that the Bowmans had once gone to the Allegan County Sheriff's Office to file a harassment complaint against Kathy. They said she was spreading false information about Dennis on the internet. When Dennis departed, the investigators kept the bottle of water they had offered him. Floor claims that's how they got their hands on his DNA. Police visited the Bowmans' property once more during the first week of February 2020, when the ground was covered in a thick layer of snow. This time, there was a forensics team present, complete with dogs in the backyard and a crime scene tent. Authorities seemed to be focusing on a single location and had begun excavating. The police conducted a press conference later that day. They declared that skeletal remains of a human have been discovered, most likely belonging to Aundria Bowman. To be sure it was Aundria, the cops had to get confirmation. Kathy gave her DNA right away. The results were returned in March 2020, nearly 31 years to the day after Aundria vanished. A DNA match was made. Dennis insisted that Aundria's circumstances were accidental. He said that during their argument, he hit her, sending her flying and breaking her neck. To hide it, he filed a missing persons report. In letters to Brenda from prison, he told her that story. Dennis was given 2 life sentences with an additional 20 years in June 2020 for killing Kathleen Doyle. In Michigan, where he would face prosecution for what he had done to Aundria, he was lawfully mandated to do time. In February 2021, the initial hearing was placed. Brenda was the first to speak up. With tears in her eyes, she told how she had created missing persons posters, thinking Aundria had escaped. She said that only after Dennis's arrest in the Kathleen Doyle case did she find out the truth. Brenda responded in the affirmative when asked if Aundria had ever accused Dennis of abusing her, but she didn't think the claims were credible. She said to Aundria, "You know it's a lie?" Brenda was the one who gave the police the location of Aundria's remains. Dennis had admitted to burying their daughter in the backyard over the phone while he was incarcerated. Brenda claimed that at first she didn't believe him. Their Hamilton home had not been theirs at the time of Aundria's death. Thus, how is it possible that he buried her there? Dennis revealed to Brenda, much to her dismay, that he had relocated their daughter's body to the new location as soon as they had completed the necessary paperwork. Beneath the house she and Dennis inhabited for almost 30 years, in the shadow of the cement slab in the yard, lay a burial that Brenda was unaware even existed. When Aundria's bones were discovered, Brenda told the detective that he had told the truth this time. He was truthful. Dennis, dressed in a green shirt, bow tie, and face mask, sat silently while other witnesses took the stand. Bowman entered into a no-contest plea on December 22, 2021. In addition, he received a sentence of 35 to 50 years in prison for killing Aundria Bowman. Bowman acknowledged having been assaulted in 1979. On October 18, 1979, the front page of the Holland Sentinel included an article on the crime. The report described an extremely brutal attack on a 27-year-old lady who was battered, restrained, and muzzled by an intruder in her house early on a Sunday morning. The culprit, a white man between the ages of 25 and 30, was described as having sandy hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and grabbed money before leaving the scene. His approximate height was 5'6" and 150 pounds. The young lady also said that her attacker was dressed in dark jeans and a leather jacket. The top page of the newspaper included a police sketch of the culprit, with his pupils smeared with ink. In the neighborhood where the incident had happened, reports of prowlers had increased recently, according to the case's lead detective. The attacker's possible criminal past was suspected by the police. This could imply that Bowman is connected to a great number of further cases. In case you were wondering, Peggy Johnson was eventually recognized as the Jane Doe from Racine County. Peggy's disappearance was never reported. In 1994, she was last saw in Harvard, Illinois during a homecoming dance. The majority of her acquaintances believed she had simply fled. Nobody seemed to be concerned that the auburn-haired child might have suffered a dreadful fate, even though her aunt was concerned enough to place a classified ad in the newspaper. Shortly after her mother died, Peggy, the only parent in her low-income family, vanished. The 19-year-old had a developmental handicap that made it challenging for her to find employment, leaving her homeless and orphaned. She happened to meet Linda LaRoche, a nurse, by coincidence, and she was hired to take care of her children and clean the house full-time. The adolescent grabbed hold of the chance, but LaRoche mistreated Peggy Johnson over the following 5 years, starving, abusing, and making her live in a crawl space. The violence allegedly reached its peak in 1999 when LaRoche killed 23-year-old Peggy and disposed of her remains in Raymond, Washington. Since no one could identify her, she became known as the Racine County Jane Doe, after the location where she was discovered. 20 years after Peggy was killed, a concerned individual in Wisconsin tipped off Wisconsin authorities regarding a nurse who had admitted to killing a patient who worked for her in the late 1990s. Authorities in Racine County, Wisconsin, made public Peggy's identification and LaRoche's arrest at the beginning of November 2019. Linda LaRoche was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of release by a Racine County judge in May of 2022. In addition, she received a 5-year term for concealing Peggy's body. Jenny Schroeder, Peggy's step-aunt, told LaRoche this: "I hope your time in your cage is slow, sluggish, and miserable." Moving on to the next case. Janique Delcourt. In the fall of 2014, Janique Delcourt, then 23 years old, was viciously attacked on a bike path in the Longueuil, Quebec, Canada suburbs. The incident tragically ended her life. The crime perplexed detectives and plagued the neighborhood, and the unidentified criminal appeared to go without a trace. Her family and friends continued to hope for years despite the lack of progress and unanswered questions. The pursuit of justice would then be rekindled almost 10 years after the heinous crime thanks to a breakthrough. Janique Delcourt was a young lady with a lot of promise and ability who was bright and lively. Living in Longueuil, Quebec, she was well known for her contagious optimism and gentle disposition. She was 23 years old and in the process of figuring out what her hobbies were and how she wanted her life to go. Janique's leisure time was spent engaging in outdoor pursuits, such as walking and cycling, frequently utilizing the picturesque bike routes surrounding Longueuil. However, this hobby would come to an abrupt stop and ultimately result in her death. On October 21, 2014, Janique Delcourt's usual stroll down a dimly lit bike lane on her way home from work became a terrifying nightmare. She was brutally murdered as she strolled along the well-traveled path and took in the peace of the surroundings when she was unexpectedly struck with an iron bar. There was an overwhelming outpouring of sympathy and pleas for justice as her friends and family struggled with grief and unresolved questions. The moment her body was found, Longhill police moved quickly to take action. A thorough inquiry was initiated to ascertain the circumstances behind the case. A modest white cross and memorial plaque were placed in Janique's honor close to the scene of her assault 1 year after her death. Janique's mother, Monique Dalcourt, initiated a petition concurrently. She claims that not enough is being done by the government to assist the families of crime victims. She had to quit working after her daughter's death, suffered from insomnia, and hasn't been able to pay for therapy sessions to receive expert assistance. "I want them to acknowledge the parents of deceased children as victims," she remarked. She desires increased financial assistance and services from the government. For as long as their doctors think it's necessary, the government should foot the bill for all psychotherapy sessions for parents who lost a child in a violent crime. She adds that if a parent's death renders them unable to work, they ought to be compensated for their losses. Authorities continued to promise Janique's family that they were determined to uncover the culprit, and the investigation into her case continued throughout the next years. Forensic technology advancements and tenacious police effort sustained optimism for Janique's family members during their excruciating wait for answers. Following over 10 years of unrelenting investigation, Longhill police declared a significant development in Janique Dalcourt's case. Authorities announced that 35-year-old Michael McDuff Jalbert had been taken into custody in May 2024. In 2014, he reported the event to the police, and he was taken into custody shortly after. However, at the time, there was not enough evidence to indict him, so he was freed, leaving the matter open. This time, however, he was only charged with first-degree murder in relation to the vicious killing that had stunned the neighborhood in October 2014. An important turning point in a case that had left Janique's family and detectives dissatisfied and in search of solutions was the arrest. The Longhill Agglomeration Police Service's Chief Inspector Pierre Duquette called the probe complicated. He stressed that crucial new evidence had finally been produced by advances in forensic science. To preserve the integrity of the current legal procedures, specifics of the breakthrough were kept secret, but Duquesne gave the public confidence that the goal to find the truth and provide Janique's family closure had never faltered. He conveyed his appreciation for Janique's parents, Monique Dalcourt and John Gandolfo, for their tenacity and tolerance over the years. As word of the arrest spread, the community, deeply impacted by Janique's tragic death and the protracted hunt for her perpetrator, reacted with a mixture of sadness and relief. Renewed vigils and memorials commemorating Janique's memory and recognizing the perseverance of law enforcement in wrapping up her case have taken place across Longhill. Outside the courthouse, Janique's father told reporters that while nothing can bring his daughter back, his family can find some measure of closure. Janique, our daughter, was killed senselessly and violently. She was battered to death by a sick person who must pay for his crimes. We now need time as a family to comprehend everything. Janique's brother, Nick Gandolfo, recalls her as a bright, lovely young lady who radiated optimism. "It was just something that emanated from her," he added. "I was aware that reaching out to my younger sister would make my day better if I was having a rough time. I'm smiling just thinking about it right now." The arrest gave optimism that Janique Dalcourt, whose colorful life had been cut short, would finally receive justice while McDuff Gilbert waits for his next court date. Moving on to the next case. Nikolas Cruz. These were the deliberate, coded, and intentional comments of Nikolas Cruz, the Parkland mass shooter who, at his former high school, killed 17 people and seriously injured 17. He spoke to everyone with disdain, anger, and coldness. It appeared as though he was carefree and prepared for whatever outcome his evil deed could bring about following the shooting. It begs the question of what might have incited such hatred and disdain for the entire planet. Brenda Woodward gave birth to Nikolas Jacob Cruz in Margate, Florida on September 24, 1998. According to reports, Brenda, his mother, has a troubled past and has been arrested 46 times, most notably in 1998 when it was revealed that she was buying crack cocaine when 6 months pregnant with Nikolas. It was then claimed that Linda and Roger Cruz were the adoptive parents of Nikolas and his half-brother, Zachary Cruz. By the time Nikolas Cruz turned 3, he was experiencing developmental deficits. By the time he was 6 years old, he had suffered the horrific experience of witnessing his adoptive father pass away from a heart attack. His adoptive mother Linda was left to raise him and his half-brother by herself. Nikolas was a challenging youngster. He had been diagnosed with emotional behavioral impairment, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, depression, and autism, according to documents from the State Department of Children and Family. In addition, his mother disclosed to the authorities that he suffers from obsessive-compulsive disorder and weight issues. He was prescribed medication and had school and home counselors as a result of everything. Nikolas and his mother would frequently get into physical fights. The Broadwood Sheriff's Office claims that because of Nikolas, the department handled 23 calls in a 10-year span. His mother claimed that at the age of 14, he hit her with the plastic hose of a vacuum cleaner. A few months later, she reported to the authorities that after she took control of his former boss' gaming system, he had struck the wall and thrown her against it. According to Nikolas's schoolmate, he likes to talk about guns, hunting, bullets, and firearms. Additionally, he was rumored to bring dead animals to school. He was most likely practicing his aim and killing skills with animals. Before, Nikolas's behavior at Stoneman Douglas High School resulted in his expulsion for having ammunition in his backpack. He also had a history of threatening other students. He and his brother were taken in by Roxane Deschamps, a family acquaintance, following the death of their mother on November 27th. During the roughly month he spent there, Deschamps called 911 on him multiple times. She was afraid Nikolas would shoot herself or her family. They said that she called 911 for the 3rd time when Nikolas began hitting her child and punched holes in the wall. By the time the police arrived, according to reports, Nikolas had already left the house, and the Charms thought he had gone to get his gun. When he returned, the Charms gave him a choice: stay at her house and give her his rifle, or go. Nikolas made the decision to go. Josita claimed that before to the incident he briefly resided at a friend's house. Nikolas arrived at his former high school in Anhuber at precisely 2:19 p.m. on Valentine's Day, February 14, 2018, right before Stoneman Douglas High School ended the day. When he went back to his old high school, he killed 17 people and seriously injured 17, some of whom, according to accounts, are still recovering from the ordeal. His lethal strikes sent students running into the streets in terror. One of the students reportedly spotted him loading up his gun as he was about to enter the vacant hallway that circles the stairs, and he basically told the students to leave because something horrible was about to happen. There's no excuse for this anymore. Nikolas was an expert at what he did. Despite knowing the difference between right and wrong, he chose to do wrong. According to the report, he had a semi-automatic M&P 15 sport rifle with 30-round magazines. He admitted to setting off the fire alarm as soon as he entered the building and began shooting students and instructors. According to experts, he fired 139 shots in total, leaving 34 individuals at risk of being killed by his gun, 17 of whom were killed on the spot and another 17 of whom were seriously injured. Based on his social media activities, Nikolas was accused of planning his mass massacre. It was determined that he suffers from sociopathy or antisocial personality disorder following his consultations with the forensic psychiatrist. During an interview with the forensic psychiatrist, he revealed the details of how he killed 17 pupils and faculty members at his previous high school. He also provided information about our extensive preparations for the 2018 Valentine's Day mass shooting on February 14th. Nikolas says he showed some of his victims pity, but he killed them because, in his words, they shot him a bad look. He went on to recount gory moments from the shooting, including seeing a kid, an insane student, really, call for help. After seeing a wounded student on the 3rd floor crying for help, he fired twice, striking the victim twice in the back. He claimed he wanted to murder as many people as possible when questioned why he did it. He also made the analogy that blowing off a student's head is like blowing off water balloons. Students were already fleeing the building out of fear, according to Nikolas, who said he stopped the killing because he could not find anyone else to kill. However, according to accounts, he really put an end to his murderous rampage when his gun jammed. I assume this is the result of the gun's excessive firing pressure. Nikolas went on to say that he made the decision to flee by hiding among a group of scared students on the 3rd level and abandoning his weapons and tactical vest. Nikolas acknowledged that he had prepared ahead of time to obtain his high school polo shirt from Mandoga in order to disguise himself and avoid drawing attention to himself during the attack. Additionally, he planned what to wear with his fireham to avoid drawing attention to himself when he went to the school. I'm sure you're wondering how he managed to conceal his gun so well without getting discovered. The Uber driver who took him to the school, however, reported that Nikolas was carrying a guitar case and that he was claiming to be attending a high school music lesson. Later on, it was found that he had placed the gun inside the guitar bag. The 24-year-old admitted to the doctor that he had initially considered mass shootings at the age of 13 or 14. The thought would come and go, he said. He went on to say that he first grew interested in mass shootings through reading books, watching documentaries on the 1999 Columbine incident, and watching violent videos, such as war videos. Nikolas acknowledged conducting independent study on mass shootings. He said that through his study, he was able to determine the kind of weapons used by the mass shooters, as well as other details surrounding the massacre. In an effort to demonstrate to the jurors that Nikolas had been preparing the mass shooting for a considerable amount of time, his social media posts from the months preceding the incident were displayed to them during one of his court appearances. Nikolas declared on YouTube on September 24, 2017, 5 months prior to the atrocity and before the passing of his adopted mother, that he intended to become a professional mass shooter. A few days later, he wrote, "My life is terrible. High school was a failure for me. I'm going to commit mass murder." Nikolas Cruz also made recordings in the days preceding the mass shooting in which he detailed his preparations for the incident. According to sources, there were all the warning indications, therefore the shooting may have been prevented. Nikolas Cruz's gun ownership, intent to kill people, unpredictable demeanor, and probable ability to carry out a school shooting were all revealed to the FBI by a tip caller. Sadly, though, the FBI did little to stop him. Despite this, Nikolas managed to escape the situation at first by dropping his weapons and hiding among the terrified kids who were rushing away. He was identified by the authorities with the help of school security footage. The firing continued for about 75 minutes before he was apprehended in Coral Springs, Florida. Numerous factors could have contributed to the Nikolas attack, even if the exact causes are still unknown. Nikolas Cruz has 2 traits: mental instability and aggression. It was documented that Angie, his girlfriend, had broken up with him after he had physically abused her. As you can hear in his video, when he declared his love for her and said he would see her in the afterlife, this most likely did not sit well with him. According to what his brother previously said, friends would frequently tease Nikolas because of his appearance and speech pattern. His speech issue may have been brought on by his developmental difficulties, I suppose. He was sent to a special education school in 2014, but he transferred to Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida in 2016. On September 20th, 8 days after his suspension, he attempted suicide by cutting his wrist and consuming gasoline. He also acknowledged that he had threatened and engaged in multiple altercations, in addition to discussing his desire to acquire a gun. Nikolas faced 17 counts of premeditated murder, all of which carried the potential for execution. After his arraignment, he was placed under suicide watch in a solitary cell. There were prosecutors who sought to sentence him with the death penalty. The trial for Nikolas was initially set to start in January 2020, but it was moved to the summer of 2020 to provide the defense more time to get ready. In June 2020, the trial was again postponed due to concerns with COVID-19. On October 20th, 2021, Nikolas Cruz entered a guilty plea to the 17 counts. Despite his first plea of not guilty to all of the charges, his attorneys declared that they will not contest his guilt. Instead, his group of public defenders had asked the judge to give him 17 life sentences. On October 13, 2022, Nikolas Cruz was given a life sentence without the possibility of parole after a vote of 9 in favor and 3 against the death penalty. The jury recommended a life sentence for him based on previous records that showed his biological mother used illegal drugs and alcohol throughout her pregnancy, as well as neglect on the part of the state, the school, and other agencies to provide him with the care he needed. But the jury's verdict infuriated a lot of the victims' families, the prosecution, a lot of politicians, and even the state governor, Ron DeSantis. Please share your ideas with me in the comments section. Do you believe Nikolas Cruz received the just punishment? Moving on to the next case. Russell Batwan. An enigmatic incident occurred at the Ropers Motel in the picturesque town of Pecos, Texas, during the summer of 1966. A young couple named Russell Batwan, who went by the names of Mr. and Mrs., arrived for their intended quiet vacation. They had no idea that their visit would take a terrible turn. Tragically, while the man slept well in his room, his partner was found dead in the motel's swimming pool. Everyone was wondering what had transpired to cause her premature death in the ocean. Is there a possibility of foul play? Was this terrible conclusion the work of someone? We go into the terrifying specifics of this 55-year-old cold case today, which was unsolved until recently. Not only is Pecos in western Texas well known for this paranormal event, but it also has a long history as a trading post and a major cattle drive stopover in the late 1800s. This community, which has about 8,000 residents, is the county seat of Reeves County. Pecos has developed into a thriving center for the transportation, agriculture, and oil and gas sectors. In addition, it is home to a number of cultural sites, such as the well-known West of the Pecos Museum, which exquisitely displays the region's fascinating past. A charming automobile court with a single-story Spanish-tiled building and an enticing neon sign was located along Highway 80, just outside the bustling town of Pecos. A real gem, this motel was a favorite of truck drivers and oil field workers traveling through the area. Sandy Moore, a lively 15-year-old from Clovis, New Mexico, spent her summers under the loving care of her grandparents at this particular motel. Sandy accepted her duties and worked hard at the front desk, cleaning rooms with attention to detail, and even waiting tables at the delicious on-site cafe. That fateful July 5, 1966 was the day Sandy's watchful eyes saw Mr. and Mrs. Russell Batwan, a couple who had checked in earlier, relaxing in plastic chairs by the motel's tempting pool. The woman, wearing a bright red one-piece bikini and long flowing hair, was sipping a refreshing Coke while the man was happily sipping a beer. The man looked thin, with blonde hair cut in a crew cut, and he looked to be at least 10 years older than his partner. 3 hours after she had first encountered the Batwans, Moore was at the motel office when a distraught maid burst in, trying hard to speak in terrible English. They traveled to the pool together where they were about to make a startling discovery. A woman lay face down at the bottom of the deep end, some 12 feet below the surface. There was nobody else nearby when Moore, fully clothed, entered the scene, so a worried hotel visitor who heard the disturbance rushed to help. They succeeded in bringing the woman to the surface after 2 unsuccessful tries. Mrs. Batwan was the one. Moore started CPR while an ambulance was being called. Russell appeared to be asleep when a different hotel employee entered the Batwan's room in the meantime. His wife was already en route to the Reeves County Memorial Hospital, which is located close. Russell told Moore that he required his registration card to identify himself before going to the hospital when he eventually made it to the pool. This sparked suspicion, particularly when he took out quickly in a black sedan after getting it. Sadly, when Mrs. Batwan arrived at the hospital, she was declared dead. Remarkably, Russell never appeared, ruthlessly refusing to express grief over her death and allowing her to leave this life without the comfort of his company. The victim was given the name Pecos Jane Doe by the authorities, who did not know her real name and instead used the name of the Texas city where the murder was committed. Through public outreach and media attention, this was done in the hopes of generating leads and identifying the victim. The family of Pecos Jane Doe never came forward, but some heartbroken parents who saw a similarity between their own daughter and the drowned girl started the Drowned Girl Trust Fund to help pay for the girl's burial costs. Pecos locals were deeply affected by the tragedy and banded together in a variety of ways to offer their support. The deceased's lovely blue polka dot outfit was donated by a nearby clothing store, and the funeral director showed great kindness by offering a gorgeous wooden casket. Together, the locals paid for a plain headstone with the phrase, "Unknown girl drowned," for her burial. Her funeral service was presided over by a Protestant minister and a Catholic priest, and about 50 villagers attended, since no one knew her religious allegiance. 3 policemen and 3 sheriff's deputies were among the pallbearers. The preacher reassured the grieving that the girl was certainly known to God, even though they did not know her personally. He hoped that if there was someone who looked out for her, they would find comfort in the knowledge that she was safe and secure in their company. The woman whose identity has not been revealed was buried at the city-owned Fairview Cemetery, which is conveniently situated across the street from Pecos High School. Sandy Moore was touched by the incident, having met the woman's alleged companion at the Ropers Motel. She made it a point to place flowers at the cemetery each time she came back to the town. Sandy frequently thought back on the event over the years and expressed her feelings over the phone from her house close to Lubbock. She was preoccupied with wondering where the woman had come from and if anyone was looking for her. Reeves County Sheriff A.B. Nail didn't take long to organize his squad to look for the suspect. However, the investigation's initial shortcomings stemmed from a lack of data. The cops didn't know the make or license plate number of the man's car without the registration card. The only items left in the Batuan's motel room were a bra, a pair of shorts, and a blouse. The only person with that name that the sheriff's office was able to track down was a Marine who was on active service and stationed in North Carolina. The couple's use of fictitious identities increased the level of intrigue around the already complex case. Reeves County did not have a medical examiner, so an expert pathologist from Odessa was called in to perform the autopsy. A red, quarter-sized abrasion was found by the pathologist during the examination above the woman's left cheekbone. Whether the injury happened prior to her passing or during the process of retrieving her body from the pool was still unknown. Even though there was no hard proof of foul play, the woman's death was determined to be accidental drowning. Sheriff Nail decided not to open a homicide inquiry as a result. Sheriff Nail later revealed in a newspaper interview that the man's only known transgression was not paying his lodging payment. The woman's body was taken to the Pecos funeral home after the autopsy, where it was embalmed and put in a back parlor in the hopes that someone would come forward to identify her. The unexplained drowning garnered widespread attention, leading worried families from several regions to get in contact with the funeral home. Some even made the trip to Pecos to look for their lost loved ones. Dental evidence contradicted the belief held by an Odessa couple that they had located their child. The woman's identity was finally revealed in 1966 by an accidental message left behind. The scribbling on the bottom of her right foot, which read Joe and Lean, was found when she arrived at the hospital. Sadly, the police were unable to solve the case with this message, and eventually it was abandoned. Investigations were delayed since there was no national database for missing and unidentified people. Todd Matthews, a cold case investigator, created the volunteer-run Doe Network in 1999 as a reaction. They created a database for missing people and unexplained bodies, and they received hundreds of leads every year that helped solve almost 100 cases. The Justice Department created the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System in 2007. It was modeled after the Doe Network. The National Missing and Unidentified Persons selected Todd Matthews, the creator of the Doe Network, as head of communications and outreach. Matthews claims that while anonymous victims frequently get less attention from law enforcement the longer they go unidentified, he has always felt a connection to them. Officers often have little information at their disposal, and no one is speaking up for them. According to Matthews, it is not a desired chore to identify an unknown victim, particularly if there is no family involved that is looking for information. He pointed out that since the deceased has already been buried, no one can speak up in the case of an unidentified body. Matthews became interested in the Pecos Jane Doe case and thought it was time to look into it more thoroughly. He put together a group of 4 detectives in 2019 and started the inquiry. The 4 detectives Matthews had assigned, Mark Ingram, Lisa Tarango, Felix Salcedo, and Pablo Carrasco, went to Fairview Cemetery in August 2019 before dawn and gathered beside Pecos Jane's tomb. They watched as a backhoe operator dug out a rectangular opening in the earth that was about 6 feet deep. When the backhoe hit a wooden coffin, Ingram had to go inside the grave to investigate. The skeleton was still present even though the casket had significantly deteriorated from being buried for more than 50 years. The earth had turned the bones a reddish-tan color, and they were mixed up with pieces of blue polka-dot dress and pantyhose. Using a trowel and brush, Ingram carefully removed the dirt from the bones and arranged them on a spotless white sheet at the side of the grave. After the skeleton was discovered in its entirety, it was painstakingly reassembled to its original anatomical configuration. After the skeleton had been meticulously assembled, it was wrapped in paper, put inside a blue body bag that was securely sealed within a large box, and sent out for DNA analysis. After Pecos Jane Doe's remains were thoroughly examined in 2019, they were submitted to a forensic examiner who has a lab in Denton. The skeleton was identified as belonging to a young Caucasian woman between the ages of 15 and 18. A piece of bone was taken out and flown to Fort Worth, Texas, where DNA was collected and entered into the national database of the Federal Bureau of Investigation in a sincere effort to identify her. Regretfully, there were no matches in the database, which is to be expected given that it was created several years after the woman's passing. After almost a full year of the Jane Doe mystery being revived in Pecos, Texas, a little parcel showed up at the door of Othram, a private forensic lab located in Houston's The Woodlands neighborhood. A molar that had been taken out of the nameless woman's jaw was inside the package. Othram proved to be the perfect facility to study the molar. It was established in 2018 by David Middleman, a scientist and entrepreneur with an unyielding love for genetics. Middleman became enthralled with genomics while working as a research assistant as a student during the last phases of the historic Human Genome Project, a 13-year project costing $3,000 that transformed the field of genetic testing. Middleman and his group excitedly got to work after the box arrived, intending to solve the mystery surrounding Pecos Jane's real identity. Unfortunately, there was not a single entry in the database that matched the DNA of Pecos Jane. This was not surprising, as the database was created in the late 1990s, long after her death. The team wondered if they would ever be able to discover Pecos Jane Doe's real identity, as it appeared that the inquiry had come to a standstill once more. A private forensic laboratory called Innovative Forensic Investigations, which is based in the sleepy Virginian town of Emporia, close to the border with North Carolina, unexpectedly gave Othram a surprise call. In November 2022, this link was made possible by the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. In 2019, Othram has given Innovative Forensic Investigations the case of Jane Doe in Pecos. The self-taught forensic genetic genealogist Jennifer Moore got involved in the case after assisting her husband in finding his birth parents. By using conventional genealogical methods, Moore's team was able to follow the lineage of 3 siblings from Texas back to the probable common ancestors that Pecos Jane shared. They moved down the family tree slowly but methodically, looking for people who were the victim's age when she passed away. They identified a sizable Kansas family with 15 children after weeks of intense effort. Some of the family members were still living and engaged on social media, making them an invaluable resource for genealogists. After looking into it more, they found a brother who had been talking about a sister who had gone missing years before. A detective visited Joyce Hemman, a 74-year-old retiree in St. Petersburg, Florida, in pursuit of this lead. Joyce, who was the victim's eldest sister, sobbed when questioned about a missing family member. After years of going unidentified, the victim was eventually identified as Jolene Hemman thanks to persistent DNA testing efforts. This discovery was made possible by the application of cutting-edge DNA technology, which enabled forensic specialists to separate and examine genetic material from the victim's remains. Jolene Hemme was raised in a large Catholic family on a 160-acre farm in central Kansas. Her childhood was filled with activity. Life on their farm, just outside of Salina, was never boring with 14 siblings. The Hemme family put in a lot of labor growing wheat and tending to Angus cattle as well as chickens, pigs, and turkeys. Them abundant food garden and livestock guaranteed them well-being. The Hemme kids lived close to Kannapolis Lake, but they hardly ever went swimming on their weekend picnics. The fact that Jolene in particular couldn't swim would prove to be important in the future. She was a quiet kid who enjoyed the companionship of books above social gatherings, according to her oldest sister Rosemary. Joyce, Jolene's elder sister, was by far her best friend. The two were bonded beyond belief. Jolene met an older man while working during that fateful summer. However, her siblings couldn't remember his name. Having met him a few times, Joyce thought he was a good deal older than Jolene, in his late 20s. Joyce thought he was domineering and didn't trust him. Jolene resisted her advice to find someone else, insisting she liked him. Their relationship was affected by their divergent views about the man. Jolene came to see Joyce on Friday, July 1, 1966, after work, and invited her to watch a movie with her boyfriend, and another female. Joyce turned down the invitation, though, since she was already set to go fishing with her own partner. She had no idea that it would be her last encounter with her sister. That evening, the following day, and even the day after that, Jolene did not return home. The more the investigation went into her absence, the more mysterious it became. Joyce described the thorough search she and her sister had conducted, going above and above to locate Jolene. They had made a lot of efforts, going to the police, Jolene's place of employment, and even contacting her friends. They were shocked to learn that Jolene had not received her regular paychecks and that her partner was also absent. The couple might have fled together and would probably return shortly, they were told when they reported Jolene missing to the police. But when Joyce saw a postcard in her mailbox, her suspicions were piqued. The ostensibly Jolene-written note on the card seemed strange. Joyce was not familiar with the name Joe, and it was not written in her handwriting. Jolene's mother, Alberta, also got a letter like this, which her kids acknowledged Jolene could not have written. Alberta, enraged and frustrated, ripped the letter to pieces and threw them in Kansas City. Joyce and Carolyn started posting flyers all around the area in the desperate hopes that someone had seen their sister. The letter and postcard from Las Vegas were their sole leads. Tarango, the case investigator, thought these objects might have been made by Jolene's lover. Though they couldn't find any marriage permits, the police thought that the pair might have traveled to Las Vegas to get married. The couple's mysterious arrival in Pecos raised more questions than it answered. Unless the individual was somehow associated with the renowned rodeo that July 1st for, it seemed like an improbable trip. But no Russell Batouan is known to have participated in the 1966 rodeo. The Hemme family believes that Jolene's lover played a role in her demise. They contend that it is incomprehensible that she would be discovered in a swimming pool given her inability to swim. The identity of the man who accompanied Jolene at the Ropers Motel remains the greatest unanswered question regarding her case. He should be in his 90s by now, assuming he is still alive. The Hemme family has a number of relatives who fervently believe he killed Jolene. They base their argument on Jolene's inability to swim, which begs the question of why she was in the motel pool. Furthermore, there was a cut on the side of her skull. The motel owner's granddaughter Sandy Moore can still clearly recall finding Jolene's lifeless body next to the pool area and witnessing shattered glass. Jolene might have fallen into the pool and drowned as a result of the man hitting her with a beer bottle during a fight. Still, it's puzzling that he didn't leave the scene right away following the incident. He might not have meant to hurt Jolene and just became alarmed when he realized she had drowned by accident. As a result, he decided to disappear. It is a heinous act of cruelty that the man who was with Jolene at the motel has not come forward with any information in the previous 55 years. Irrespective of his role in her demise, he could have surreptitiously supplied Jolene's relatives with some information about what transpired, or at minimum, a hint to help them locate her. The four-man detective squad that Matthew appointed, consisting of Tarango and Salcedo as previously noted, is still searching assiduously for the man who left Jolene buried in a remote location without identification, but their chances of success are small. Moreover, even in the improbable event that they find him, the pathologist's conclusion that Jolene drowned accidentally and the absence of the case file make it unlikely that he will be prosecuted criminally. According to Tarango, there is very little chance that he will offer proof of Jolene's murder. When Jolene died, Sandy Massey, who was Sandy Moore at the time, still remembers clearly the day she found Jolene's body in the motel pool. Sandy was just 15 years old at the time, and the recollection of being duped into giving over the registration card still bothers her. Sandy's regret for her acts and how they may have contributed to Jolene's untimely death persists even after more than 50 years have passed. In a subsequent phone call, Sandy was thanked by some of Jolene's siblings for her heroic efforts to save their sister and extended an invitation to come and visit them in Kansas. Thanks for watching. We hope you enjoyed exploring these intriguing cold cases with us. If you found the video fascinating, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to Cold Case Mystique for more deep dives into unsolved mysteries. Your support helps us bring you more compelling content. Leave a comment below with your thoughts or any cases you'd like us to cover next. See you in the next video, and remember, the search for truth never stops.